3, 2, we are live, and good evening to you in USA. What part of USA are you in? I know you're on the Eastern time zone. What city are you in?
I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, so that's on the western edge of the Eastern time zone. The state, it's one state below Michigan, and in between to the east, Ohio, and west is Illinois.
Okay.
So
fairly, is that north? That's north in USA.
Yeah. It's it's not the most northernmost part, but it's north enough that we get some chilly winters.
I'll bet. Well, it's winter here, and today we're doing comparisons. So it's the middle of winter here. Yesterday was 28. Today is forecast to be a little cooler. It's only going to be about 22. And so that's our winter here. We did have a very cold snap last week where it went down to 7 or 8 degrees for a couple of days. That was winter. That was our winter. So having said that,
let me just put the link to the video on my channel in the chat. And
you know that we're live now.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I was hoping to get to it before. Yeah, I know. I was hoping we'd get to it before we started. But yeah, if folks could. Oh, sorry. I need to turn this off. Yeah, if folks could. I put the link to the stream that we're doing now on my channel in the description. So if people want to, I don't, it doesn't matter where you watch it from perpetually, but if you could just go over there so it records you as having watched it there, that would boost my stats a little bit and help with the YouTube algorithm, so I could get some more traction on my channel. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay.
But so yeah, today we're going to talk about life in the U.S. versus life in China, or mainly that. So
yeah, I put out a video the other day, and it got for me it did okay. I think it got about 20,000 views, which is nice. If I get more than 10,000 views on a video, I'm pretty happy.
Oh yeah, so that's great. That's great.
To get up to 20,000 views or thereabouts, I think it was 17, 18,000. So it's on the way. And it was about living under communism. And what it's done is it's created a lot of questions from a lot of people. So what I decided to do, I'll talk to you about a comparison, and I've made 2 more videos about living under communism in China. Now, I think we need to caveat this. China is not technically a communist country. It has the Communist Party of China, the dreaded CCP, as they like to call it, the Communist Party of China, the CPC, and it has a socialist outlook. It follows Marxism, but it follows it with Chinese characteristics, and it follows socialism with Chinese characteristics. And one of those characteristics, surprisingly, is that it has a lot of free economy. And what that does is it creates a lot of millionaires, it creates billionaires. China now has more billionaires than America.
And I mean, the point is, or a main point is to bring in foreign investment, which it did spectacularly well and helped China, grow faster than any country in the world has done. But I mean, you can tell a lot about a country by how it treats its rich people, and basically. There's no accountability for rich people here in the United States whatsoever. They can, literally get away with murder. But in China, just recently, some billionaire or another was caught, defrauding somebody or something, and he got the death penalty. He's on death row or whatever they call it in China. And so the way I talk about it is that. In the United States, rich people are in charge. The bourgeoisie, runs the country. That is not true in China. In China, yeah, sure, wealthy people have influence, but the working class, so to speak, is their interests are represented very strongly by the state, which is completely the opposite of the United States, where we working people, the 99%, so to speak, have very little political power. And so that's the distinction between having a socialist government versus a capitalist government. Where
I would disagree with you there, Jeff. I would disagree with you. I don't think you can say that. I mean, for sure, America is pure capitalism. It's unfettered capitalism. However,
more or less,
I would disagree that China is pure socialism. And
no, that's not what I'm saying.
I think the difference is not about socialism, capitalism.
Okay. All right. No,
it's
what
democracy.
What I'm saying is that in China, the interests of the working class are the main driving force behind government policy. So China, has a socialist government that, as we Marxists call it, a dictatorship of the proletariat. It's the lingo from out of Marx. But the economy is, it's in transition. It was much more capitalist in the 90s than it is now, but it's still got a lot of capitalism, and it will probably for several decades to come. But the government serves the interests of the people.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point I was trying to interrupt you with there. It's not about capitalism or socialism. The whole reason for the improvements in China is because the government serves the people. It's democracy. And this is the complete opposite.
That's what I would label a socialist government. Okay.
Right.
So
okay.
we just did one label.
A socialist government is a democratic government, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The Constitution does use those words: proletariat of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And how do they manage that? And this is something I've also made a couple of videos about, the democratic process. I have something here called the NPC. Now, the NPC has local, it has community, it has provincial, community, county, provincial, and then national. Of course, there's municipalities as well. So Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing, and Tianjin, the 4 municipalities, all have their own NPC, as well as each province and region has an NPC. And then there's a national NPC. So these people are selected, nominated from within the community, and they can self-nominate, but they serve their local community, and sometimes they serve their local community needs in a national way. And that's true democracy. The democratic process is local people being able to elect local people. There's no, do you have this in America? Where we call it in Australia, they call them a parachute candidate. They take someone who say, well, let's say right now in Australia, the Labor government are in power. The Labor government has to sit for a by-election. So someone has died, someone resigned, someone got caught doing something wrong, and now that seat is empty. So they have to have a by-election. So they get the candidate who is the best Labor government candidate and put them into that area because it's a Labor area, strong Labor area. So they know that this candidate is likely to be elected, and that is the person they want in their MPs. So this person has absolutely no connection whatsoever. It's called a parachute. They're dropped into the electorate because it's a safe Labor seat. Labor will, the constituents will vote this person in, and then once they're voted in, they become part of the Labor Parliament, but they have no connection to the local community. And there's a huge difference. Do you have the same thing in America?
The same thing as what? I'm sorry.
The same thing as parachuting somebody in. So if there's a Democrat, a safe Democrat seat, does it always go to a local person, or do they say, well, we want this guy in the Senate, so let's put, or this lady into the Senate by putting them into this seat? And that way they kind of get the easy run in through the system. Or do you have to be local to be elected?
Well, I think you can run from outside of your district. I'm not sure exactly what the rules are on that, but yeah, somewhat. Yeah, I guess there was a guy who represented us here in this area who like had a vacation home here or something, and so they let him get away with that. But in any case, I mean, it's all moot because what controls who gets elected here is who's got the most money. So when I ran for Congress back in 2002 with the Green Party. But I didn't have any money, and people hadn't heard of me, so I got like 2% of the vote. And people who win, basically, they almost always have the most money. And incumbents win like 90% of the time, and they gerrymander the districts, meaning they set up the boundaries in weird ways so that whatever party is in control in that area can set up a congressional district that's favorable to their party. So there's very few congressional districts that are closely contested between the two major parties. And in addition to that, there are very few states that are closely contested in presidential elections. It's decided state by state rather than by the overall popular vote. So people always say, "Oh, you're going to elect Trump if you vote for Jill Stein." And I'm like, this state hasn't gone Democrat in a close election ever, like not in history.
What happens in America? What purpose does the president serve?
Well, I mean, they're the chief executive of the executive branch of government, so they're the most powerful person in the country, and
that's not my question.
In the world, but
that's not my question. My question is, what purpose do they serve?
I mean, they appoint cabinet members to run various aspects of policy, and appoint lots of heads of different branches of the executive branch, such as the Centers for Disease Control and the Environmental Protection Agency and so forth. And then the Congress has to confirm those appointments, but they're the ones who make those appointments. So
it brings me back to my original question. What does this person sitting at the top do? So let's say this person is appointing, he wants to appoint a friend of his to be the ambassador to China, and Congress says, no, we don't want that person. So so then he says, I want this friend of mine to be a judge on the Supreme Court, and Congress says, no, we don't want that person either. And this is what happens. You get this situation where pretty much everything that the president wants to do seems to be stymied by the Congress, even though the Congress has his party in support. So what does the president actually do? Because quite often, when they go into being the president, they come in on some kind of platform. It was MAGA and it was Build Back Better, this kind of thing. Biden came in on Build Back Better. Within a year, it was shelved. There is no Build Back Better. It was shelved because his own party wouldn't allow it to happen. So what purpose does this leader serve if he got elected on the basis of saying, this is what I'm going to do? And Barack Obama got in on the basis of bringing peace to the world, and look where we are now. This is what I mean. Every single thing they come into power, and I'm not talking about breaking election promises. I'm talking about a complete shift from what they said they were going to be elected to do. So how can we say that this is the most powerful person in the world if he can't appoint a person to be the head of the Reserve Bank? He can't appoint someone to be the head of the CIA. He can't appoint someone to be the head of the military unless Congress approves it.
Well, I mean, there's a balance of power, supposedly, checks and balances. You've got the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch, and they each have different powers and responsibilities. But I mean, the president is by far the most powerful single person in the government. But, of course, there's lots of government officials, as there are in China or anywhere else. So, one person, you can't run everything. But there's what's called executive orders, where the president can just, there's certain things that the president can just decide to do, at the stroke of a pen. So, Biden, for example, could have forgiven a lot of student loan debt. Just deciding it on his own, didn't need the approval of anybody. And depending on how he did it, but the way he did it, he did it in such a way that it was subject to the approval of the Supreme Court, and they turned it down. And he's done some things by executive order to reduce student loan debt, but not nearly as much as he could. He also, there's all these things that he could have done just through his own power to help the public as a whole, that he hasn't done. On the other hand, he decided unilaterally, bypassing Congress, to send weapons to Israel to help them continue committing their genocide. He was able to do that.
Yeah, I think Congress are going to stop that, though. The weapons are not going. Israel has already got stockpiles for months. They can continue this for months, apparently. So they've got stockpile. Ukraine are not getting the weapons because Congress has stopped it. So it does seem to me like you have a kind of a lame duck sitting in that position. I agree. He's got the title, the most powerful man in the free world. But when Xi Jinping makes a decision, people follow it and have no choice. I remember when Trump came in, one of the first executive orders he signed was to stop Muslims, not any particular, but any Muslim, from coming into America. And suddenly the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. They overrode him. So his executive order can be overridden by the court. His decisions and his appointments can be overridden by the Congress. I look at it and go, well, what's the purpose of this guy? What's the purpose of this office? It's a figurehead.
Well, no, it's not at all a figurehead.
Okay.
So, Congress can pass a bill, for instance, and the president can veto it, and the Congress can then override the veto, but they have to have a 2/3 majority in order to do so, and that's very difficult to achieve. So the president has a lot of veto power. The president has power to issue executive orders. The president has the power, of course, subject to congressional approval. But I mean, typically they rubber stamp things.
What about this comment from Tim? In 2012, that would be Obama, the president signed into law the Presidential Appointment Efficiency and Streamlining Act. The act eliminated the need for Senate approval.
For what?
Yeah. Tim, for what?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that act, but some things the president is able to do without congressional approval. Many things he's not able to do without congressional approval. But I mean, especially if the Congress is the same party as the president, and the president is not too far out there from what the mainstream of his party wants, he's able to do a lot. Executive orders. That's what I was.
Well, this was my point. Every executive order that is somewhat controversial that I've seen so far seems to get overturned by
no. Executive orders cannot be overturned. No.
What happened when Trump came to power? First thing he did was sign an executive order to say no more Muslims allowed into America until we sorted this issue out.
I'm not sure if it was an executive order or not. I'd have to look that up. But I mean, there are
maybe I'm misunderstanding it.
That can't be overridden.
Okay, there's this one. The executive order is pretty much dictatorship.
Right.
So there we have it. There's me saying they don't have much power, and there's a comment that they are dictators.
Yeah. Well, I mean, senators are the most powerful people in the government, other than the president or Supreme Court judges. But the president has much more power than any individual senator out of the 100 senators. But in any case, I think we've explored this topic pretty well. Why don't we talk about some different aspects of life in China that you talked about?
Let's go back to that.
Compared to the United States.
I just wanted to answer this one. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Hung Tuai has blocked you. This is Steve, who also lives, I think, in Zhongshan. So it can't be seen in the live chats. Maybe you've been removed from his channel for some reason. I don't know. That does happen. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about with the difference between. I wanted to start with a question. Most American people that I speak to online, and I do speak to a lot, they say, I love America. And I think this is true. Most American people say, I love America. And when I say, what do you love about America? They say things like the freedoms or the democracy or the freedom of speech. And I ask, do you really feel you have it? And then when I explain that I can do all the things that they want to do, the only challenge that I get from an American is, why don't you insult Xi Jinping then on your Weibo account? Well, my question to that is, why should I insult someone? And this is the difference between our two countries. America has freedom of speech, which allows you to insult your leaders. China has a standard of requirements. China's freedom of speech comes with responsibilities that are written into the constitution and written into the law. You can't be insulting. So I'm not allowed to insult Xi Jinping. I'm absolutely allowed to criticize him. Go onto Weibo today and you will find hundreds of criticisms that he is not tough enough on the Americans. He's not tough enough on things like the Americans in Taiwan. This is criticism. But if I connect him to a cartoon character, which is what the trope, the Winnie the Pooh trope, if I connect him to that cartoon character, I'm showing great disrespect to the leader of 20% of the world's people. And that's really not appropriate if you think about that. So I'm not going to insult the man, but I will criticize him sometimes. It's very rare for me to criticize him because I don't know all the facts that he has. I can criticize Biden because I can see through the media what's going wrong in America. I could criticize Xi Jinping if I could see what's going wrong in China, but I can't. Every single metric that you view, your crime rate, your health, your education, your wealth, your living conditions, your living standards, everything is getting better in China since I've been here. It gets better every year. It really does. It accelerates that quickly. So what's there to criticize? Renaldo has just made this same point. Criticism is allowed and an insult is not. So it's okay for me to criticize. So is that the only difference between us?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, there are lots of restrictions on freedom of speech here. For example, if you publicly threatened the president's life, you would have the government authorities showing up at your door in short order, if they deemed it a credible threat, which they, or if you were just, politically inconvenient to them, they would just, treat it as such. Like with the past 4 months of Israel's genocide in Gaza, of course, there have been tons of protests here in the United States, and there is repression of those protests. The police beat people up, they throw people in jail. The administrations of several universities have banned student groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. People have been fired from their jobs for what they say if it's deemed contrary to what the government wants. And of course, Julian Assange is slowly dying in prison at the behest of the United States. Over there in London. There are many other political prisoners, here in the United States, Leonard Peltier, Abu Jamal, and so forth. Of course, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and many others were assassinated because they were deemed to be pose challenges to the system. And we don't know for sure who was behind their assassination, but there's good reason to think that there might have been government involvement.
But in the case of Malcolm X, I think there's fairly credible evidence that those FBI people in the place, and they arrested the wrong man for it. I think it's fairly credible evidence that the FBI were involved in that.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we could also compare the media in the two countries in terms of freedoms. So certainly there are things that you're not allowed to say in Chinese media, or it's not allowed to go any, it's not allowed to go viral or whatever if they think.
Can you give me an example of something that you believe we're not allowed to say because I write for Chinese media.
Right.
But give me an example of something you think we're not allowed to say in Chinese media.
Well, we talked about this a few streams ago that like they didn't publish. I guess there was some, but very little news about the protests in China over COVID policy. That just wasn't showing up in mainstream press.
It was in Global Times. It was in China Daily. It was in People's Daily. It was in Guangming Weekly. I actually wrote an article for Global Times related to that. So that was, I mean, the fact was what was reported. In fact, there was a girl who was actually arrested as a result of her personal protests, and she's known in the West as a civilian journalist or public journalist, whatever they call a vlogger. She's a YouTuber, and she disappeared off the face of the earth and went to prison. In fact, she didn't end up in prison. She ended up in an institution for her mental health. And that was the issue with that, and she was reported on. She was reported about. The thing is, the difference between and Choi Fai Yue has just put this up. It's about false information. So when I write for Global Times, I write an op-ed, for example, for Global Times. Now I can't write about Tiananmen Square, for example. And people say, well, China's hiding Tiananmen Square. China's not transparent. But the reason China doesn't do anything about Tiananmen Square now is because 34 years ago, they did. They released all the information they felt was necessary. It's there in the public domain, and anyone can get at it. Yeah, this is the girl who got arrested. She was prevented from entering a compound, and she insisted she wouldn't wear a mask, and she wanted to go in, and they said, no, you can't come in, you can't go. Or she couldn't go out, I think. You can't go out. You've got to be wearing a mask. You've got to do the right things. And she started pulling and tearing down things, and it's on videos. You can see this. She's actually broken the law. She's broken the regulations, but they were trying to stop her without the arrest. That wasn't necessary. So anyway, so let's say the Tiananmen Square thing is completely gone. It's history. And China says, well, there's no need to rehash this. Personally, I wish they would. I wish they'd revisit it, build a memorial, put all the names of all the people that died, and said, yeah, every year on the 4th of June, we should say sorry to these people, because it was a big mistake. It was a mishandled protest. When was the last time that happened in China? Yeah, that's the point.
Somebody made an interesting comment here that I think kind of sums up what the restrictions are. Let's see, I'm not sure how to do this. Donat Wu, fake narratives may cause public disorder and therefore are not allowed in China. Yeah, so for instance, the claims of RFK Jr. and tons and tons of other Americans that vaccines are dangerous and ineffective, and viruses don't cause AIDS, and certain drugs for treating AIDS are actually killing people and not AIDS. He says all kinds of batshit stuff. He wouldn't be allowed to do that in China. He wouldn't be allowed to spread completely false, evidence-free health information.
The thing is, it's not necessarily false when it's science. Now, I'm not saying he's right or he's wrong in this particular instance. Now, where science is concerned, quite often there are two schools of thought. There are disagreements inside the science fraternity, for example.
But there are so many areas of science where there is a strong consensus. For instance, there's a strong consensus that climate change is caused by human activity. The debate is about which human activities contribute what to it, and so on and so forth. There's scientific consensus, for instance, that generally speaking, the vast majority of vaccines are, effective for, reducing the severity of whatever illness they're for, perhaps preventing people from getting it, and are relatively safe. There's a strong scientific consensus about that, even though there may be disagreements about other specific things.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the issue is.
In America, your media allows this speculation around the fringe elements, and that creates this public disorder. So when, as Donat is saying here, the fake narrative, it's not necessarily fake. It's a different opinion, but it goes against the consensus. So it's not necessarily fake. In some cases, it's quite widely held. I think probably in the case of the vaccines, it's probably 50-50, so it's quite widely held. But what happens in China is the government has a policy on this, and the policy is based on the scientific consensus. And then it says, this is what the government is going to do. So COVID, for example, this is how the government is going to act. And it was based on information provided by scientific people who do know what they're doing and do know what they're talking about. So if I then got online and started talking about it and saying we shouldn't be doing that, that's the kind of thing that gets taken off. Now, it doesn't mean that my information is fake. What it means is I don't have the authority, the experience, the knowledge to talk about it. All I have is an opinion. And that kind of opinion is not accepted inside of a society that thrives on harmony. It thrives on unity. It thrives on community. So when one member of the community is saying, no, that's wrong, that's the kind of person that gets kind of put down. However, if there is a genuine concern, there are processes that I can take to say, look, I don't want this because, and there's a genuine reason. I can go through the community level, I can go through the provincial level, county level, provincial level, all the way to the central level and have that reviewed, but it might take a year to do it.
Yeah. So a couple of comments I wanted to respond to address points we were talking about. You partially addressed this comment just now. Some TC says consensus is not science. The Earth was flat by consensus at that time. Well, you're kind of misunderstanding my point. My point is that there is scientific consensus around issues for which there is very, very strong evidence, and that's why the consensus exists, because the evidence points overwhelmingly toward a particular conclusion, such as that climate change is really happening, and that the reason it's happening is primarily certain human activities. And that consensus exists because we have the evidence that points to that conclusion. So anyway, and then the other comment, somebody mentions Seymour Fact says the U.S. hides the truth. Russian Navalny that died is portrayed as a freedom fighter, but he's been known to make hate comments in the past. So that's an important point to understand about the limitations on our freedom. That we can say all kinds of things, for instance, on our YouTube channels, but if we don't have a large audience, not very many people hear about it. Whereas, over and over and over and over again in the mainstream press, we've heard for years and years that Alexei Navalny, the Russian, some people call him a dissident, but actually he was backed by Western intelligence agencies and the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the above board branch associated with the CIA's sort of activities. So, basically, he was being paid by the US and the UK to subvert Russia. But in the Western mainstream media, he was portrayed as this freedom fighter that was, courageously opposing corruption and opposing Putin's dictatorship and blah, blah, blah. And so that mainstream narrative is drilled into people's heads so often, even though there's no evidence presented to back it up, that even people who should know better, like Cornel West, for instance, the other day on X, he said something to the effect of, Cornel West, Navalny, I feel so bad for his family. He was, a courageous fighter against corruption. He was a political prisoner like Mubina Abu-Jamal and Leonard Peltier, et cetera, et cetera. And, those of us who follow foreign affairs closely were very angry and upset at him saying that because, it was just very misinformed because obviously he got his information from the mainstream media. If he followed independent media more closely, he would know who the hell Navalny actually was. And he doesn't.
And if he wants to be elected president of the United States, he should have known better than that.
Yeah.
Or maybe he's following the populist route and he knows, populist route. He knows what he knows, but he knows that if he says this out loud, it's like saying, China's not a threat to America. If he says that out loud, he's lose all the support of the millions of people who think China is a threat to America.
Well,
so
it's
following that.
Like, I think he would probably get away with challenging that. But if he says something like what he said about Navalny, he's undermining his base. He's undermining support from his base by saying something so blatantly misinformed.
One of the interesting things I saw on that after Navalny's death was Stella Assange. In fact, we follow each other. Yeah. Stella Assange follows me. And she came out with a comment saying he was a brave freedom fighter. And she got ratioed in the comments. Stella, have you been kidnapped or something? Blink if you're in under any threat. I saw all these comments. Nobody who believes Julian Assange is all the people like you and I who believe Julian Assange was doing a great job doing what he did and is now persecuted because of it would all believe that Navalny was exactly what we think he was. And it seems very strange that Stella came out with that. And I'm wondering if she was misinformed by someone, quite deliberately, perhaps. Mm-hmm. She should look into her support group and see who it was who suggested she put that out, because it looks like she's got a mole inside of her support group.
Well, people just don't necessarily follow certain political or just issues in general that they may not know very much about. And given that they don't know very much about something, they should keep their damn mouth shut about it until they learn something about it. But people do that. So it's very easy to kind of fall into that if you're not making a diligent effort to keep up with everything.
Okay, so let's move off. Let's move off freedom of speech. What else do you love about America?
What do I love about America?
Yeah.
Well, in terms of political things, we have a tradition going back to the very beginning of the country of people fighting for justice, and that's the only way we've ever achieved anything worthwhile, whether it be freeing the slaves or civil rights or social security and other welfare programs and so on and so forth. So the working class has been able to some extent through challenging and disrupting the status quo to push through some significant social reforms. Whereas, of course, in China, they had a revolution. They overthrew imperialism, and they have been able to do much more than the United States has in terms of pursuing policies that serve the interests of the people. But I mean, that does exist in the United States. It's just that it's overwhelmed by the extent to which government policy serves the interests of the the ruling class, of wealthy and corporations.
So why do you need to fight? You say you've got a history, a tradition, and yeah, I get that. I do agree with that. You've got a history and a tradition of fighting for the rights of ordinary people. And yet I saw that 1% has just taken over the wealth of the entire middle class now. So on the graph that it showed, the middle class wealth has gone down and the 1% wealth has come up and is actually crossed now. So we're getting to the point now where 1% of your country has 80% or thereabouts of your entire wealth.
Right.
Or is heading towards that target anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are so many ways in which that comes about. So just to give you one example, we've got taxes coming up in about a month and a half now. And so, because my mom passed away a few years ago and I inherited some money from her, I've got enough money in the bank that, I'm getting a few $1,000s worth of interest income each year. And then, money that I make from working. And, I was just looking at this today because I was curious, like what the current tax code is. It turns out that I will not have to pay any taxes on the capital gains, the interest that I earn from, having money in the bank, in certificates of deposit and so forth. And, the typical rate is about 15% for that. Whereas for someone with a middle class income, say they make, I don't know, $60,000 a year or something, their tax rate on the top part of their income that puts them in middle class or whatever is 28%. So there's a discrepancy between the income tax rate and the tax rate on income from investments. On earnings from investments. And so obviously that favors the rich very much. Another example in the tax code, I will have to pay 15%, and for those who are not self-employed at 7.5% in Social Security tax on my income. But above a certain income levels, I think it might be something like $100,000 now. Beyond that amount of money, what you make beyond that, you don't have to pay Social Security tax on it. So the tax code is one example of how the system is very, very rigged in favor of the wealthy. And the reason it got that way is because they got the political power. They buy the politicians.
What do you get for your taxes?
That's another good point about how the U.S. is very different than China. We are sending billions and billions of dollars to Israel to commit genocide. That's our tax dollars paying for the worst atrocities probably this century. And we have no control over that. And then overall, something like $1 trillion, if you add up both the official defense budget and all the other military expenditures, is being spent on the military every year. So that's like more than 50% of discretionary spending. Discretionary spending being things other than like Medicare and social welfare.
I was a little surprised. I saw, and this probably will surprise a lot of people. I'm very good at putting these "did you know" into conversations. But what surprised me recently, I found out that Social Security was the largest. I thought military was the largest expenditure that the US government has, but it's actually Social Security.
Yeah.
Then I looked a little deeper at it and I found something different. The military payments come from your tax. Social Security payments, which are by far, they're double the military payments, they all come from your contributions. So you're making Social Security payments and you're getting something back when you retire or when you're sick or when you're whatever the reasoning is.
So
If you get disabled, you get Social Security. If you have more children, you get Social Security. And when you retire, you get Social Security. So you're making that payment as a contribution. This is not your tax. So the largest,
it's a tax, of course, but it's not an income tax.
It's a contribution. Yeah, of course it's a tax, but they call it a contribution. In the West, in Australia and the UK, we call it Social Security contributions. And then there's your income tax, and then there's your property tax, and then there's your sales tax, and then there's your inheritance tax, and then I could go on like this for ages with taxes and different taxes. And the fact is, we don't have that in China.
Right.
They have Social Security, for sure. I bought an apartment. The apartment I'm sitting in now doesn't look like my green screen. I could move it and show you. I bought an apartment and I pay property tax on it. When you buy an apartment, you pay 1.5% tax to the government. I have this apartment now for 70 years. It's mine. The building on it belongs to me or belongs to my wife, actually. It belongs to us for 70 years. So I'm 65 years old, so this is not a big deal. Apart from that 1.5% tax, that's it. That's it. That's the only tax I will pay in the next 5 years. Wow. I'm over 60 years.
We even get taxed on our Social Security benefits after we retire.
I'm over 65, and men over 60 and women over 55 move out of the tax system. We can continue work and stay in the tax system, but when we officially retire, and as a foreigner, I'm basically forced into retirement at the age of 60. There are ways to avoid that, but I don't have those ways. So I was forced to retire, and I was actually I was in the middle of my 58th year when my contract expired with the organization I was with, and I didn't really want to work for them anymore. So from age of 58, I have not had a job. I haven't paid any tax, and I do get paid income, but it's usually from overseas because I do contract work for overseas organizations. And that's quite legitimate inside of China. But because I'm over 60, I don't fit into the tax system. The government cannot pay me. No employer in China can pay me because I'm not in the tax system. But by the same token, whatever I earn is tax-free. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't earn anything. There are ways to do it. For me, my money comes from overseas. But I don't pay tax because I'm over 60. I don't pay rates. My apartment is completely rate-free. The government doesn't own the land. The people of China own the land that my apartment sits on. So the government, I own the building that I live in, or the part of the building because it's an apartment. The bricks and the mortar and everything else is mine. But the land that it's on. Now, what happens at the end of 70 years? People say, well, you have to give it back. No, you don't. Because if my family is still living here, they just go to the government, pay an administrative fee. It's a few thousand RMB. And then they get the next 70 years if this apartment is still standing. Now, if someone wants to knock this apartment down and build something, they have to pay me or the people living here. If it's my children, it wouldn't be my children because my daughter's in Australia and she's never going to live here. My wife doesn't have children. So we don't have anyone to give it to. So when we pass away, we will have lived here for as long as we've lived here, totally rent-free, tax-free, maintenance-free. Apart from what we do, we don't have to pay anybody to live here. It's as simple as that. Now, we have electricity, we have gas, and we have water, and we have telephone. I don't have a TV, so I don't have to buy Netflix or anything like that. So I'm living here, and I've got another apartment as well, which we haven't sold yet. It is completely, totally, and absolutely free. The other apartment, because we don't have to pay standing charge for the electricity. We pay for usage. We don't have to pay standing charge for the gas. We pay for usage. Same thing with the water. We pay what we use. Now, because we took the fridge out of the other apartment, now there's no need for power, but it's still connected. So anyone can go in there, plug it in. I've got a friend staying there at the moment, and he's got all the power he needs. He can switch the air conditioning on, and we'll pay for the usage, but we don't pay a standing charge. So it's 100% totally free. This is something I don't get with America. People said to me when I raised this in the video that I made, I got a lot of comments from people. One person really hit home, and he said, or she, I don't know, they said, if you are in America, you pay the value of your house every 30 years to the government. And if you don't pay, it's not your house.
Well, I mean, yeah, like you get a mortgage for typically 30 years. So I have a 30-year mortgage.
I'm not talking about your mortgage. I'm talking about your house property taxes.
Yeah.
Every 30 years, you pay the value of the house that you bought because of the, what are your property taxes? Is there a percentage of the value of the house?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it breaks down, but so my mortgage payment consists, of course, of payment on the principal, payment on the interest, and property tax payments. And, like, I don't know, it's a couple $100 a month in property taxes. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but yeah, I'll always have to pay that. Even after the house is paid off, which it probably won't be because I bought it pretty late in life. But in any case, that brings up one point that I wanted to make about how shitty life is in the United States in certain respects. So
right.
Let's see, where is it? Okay, so this is a home or part of a homeless encampment near where I live. It's like 2 miles away. There's some more. I think there's like a couple dozen tents in this, about 2 miles from my house.
Right.
And then there's a couple of others that are closer and that are bigger. And there used to be one like a couple 100 feet from my house, but the city came and kicked everybody out of it. So there's, literally tent cities or tent villages, all over the place in your cities across the United States. And meanwhile, a couple 100 feet away from this little encampment is this nice brand new apartment complex that I looked up the rents on it, and it's 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. The 1 bedroom apartments are renting for $1,300 a month. The 2 bedroom apartments are renting for $1,700 a month. And this is not a big city. This is a fairly small city. Bloomington is, I don't know, 100,000 people or something like that. But yeah, you pay a fortune in rent, and if you were working full time, you would not be able to afford even a cheap apartment by yourself, and so you might wind up here.
Well, you say that's 1,300 rent. Let's ask the question: what does somebody who is not necessarily an educated person, but a smart enough person, they've got a job, let's say they work in a shopping center, or they work in a restaurant, they work in a bar, what kind of income can they expect to get?
Well, I think probably the typical wage these days is about $15 an hour, which is roughly twice the minimum wage. So do the math on
most
that.
People work like 40 hours a week. Is that
$2,500 a month, maybe? Let's see, what would it be? Yeah, about $2,500 a month. So yeah, there's no way you could afford, even a 1 bedroom apartment like that. When I was just showing you by yourself, that would take up half of your income.
So they say you're at income stress if your living accommodation is 60%, and for most people in Australia right now, it's over 60% of their income.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's supposed to be, you're supposed to not pay more than about a third of your income in rent or mortgage, or otherwise you're considered to be struggling financially. And food prices are just crazy here now too. They didn't used to be But I'd say I pay probably a couple $100 a week on groceries. It's just crazy. So
$200. I'm just that's about 1,400, 1,500 RMB. I
yeah,
wouldn't pay that in a month on
yeah,
groceries.
yeah. And same in Russia. Their groceries are way cheaper than they are here.
So Tucker couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Tucker needs to come to China.
Hmm.
Really,
Yeah, he does.
the guy is
He's
virulently
a
anti-China, so
lot
it's not going to
more misinformed about China than he is about Russia. So
happen.
yeah, he needs to come.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
So,
So that's an interesting comparison. So a person who works in a restaurant in China or a person who works in a factory in China would almost certainly be living in a dormitory, and that's the difference. I had a coffee shop for a while, going back more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I had a coffee shop here and I had 4 staff, and we rented a 3-bedroom apartment, and they lived in that apartment. That was their dormitory. We had to pay that. It was part of the expenses of having a coffee shop. And this is quite common. Now, someone advised me once, only employ local people. Then you don't have to give them the accommodation. And I got people. I inherited some people who already were not local people when I took over the coffee shop, and for a year we rented an apartment through a friend. Actually, a friend had a spare apartment. We rented it for a year, and we put these 4 staff members into this apartment. It was a 5-minute walk from work, and they got that. But they also got meals in the coffee shop. They were eating the food, and the food was free. Their accommodation was free, and they were paid. I was paying them slightly above this. What this called? We don't have a minimum wage in China. There's an award rate, what the Australians would call an award rate. So a waiter or waitress earns this much money, male and female the same. And I can't remember what it was, to be honest. It was very, very low. I think it was 8 RMB an hour, so $1 an hour. But I paid them 12 RMB an hour, so they got more. And that meant I had some kind of loyalty that the staff wanted to stay because they were getting half as much again. So we're going back 15 years. Nowadays, it's probably 3 or 4 or 5 times that. But their living was effectively free. And that's what happens in a factory in China. So if somebody leaves school, first of all, you can't get a job until you're 18. And this is one of the myths about China. There's no youth labor. There's no child exploitation. If there is,
right.
it's drastically illegal, and you will get caught. So everybody who works in a factory is 18 or older. They work in a factory. They get a weekly salary. They wear a uniform. They live on site. They have a subsidized. I was doing some contract work in a factory here before I retired. I used to go into a lot of companies and advise business management stuff. And I spent a couple of weeks in a factory, and the meals in there were 3 RMB.
Wow.
That was it. 3 RMB is 7 RMB is $1, 7 point something. So I was paying 40 cents for a meal, and it was a good meal with a drink, with plenty of all the rice I could eat, plenty of rice. So you can go back for more rice, a bowl of soup, a drink of tea or milk or water. That's all free. It's just help yourself. And then the meal itself was a meat and vegetable with rice. So 3 RMB, and it was reasonably good food. So the company was subsidizing that, of course, and that's the difference. So what happens to a factory worker there who earns, and people say, oh, but they're only earning $700 a month or something like that. Well, maybe that's true, but they're saving $600 a month off it. And they're quite capable of doing that if they choose. Now, of course, you see them with their flash mobile phones, and they're wearing their Donald Trump sneakers or whatever, and then they're spending their money. But the older people are saving it. The more mature ones are saving it, and they're buying houses. This is trickle down. This is how trickle down really works. They're buying houses in the hometown because they don't come from Zhongshan, where I live. They come from somewhere else, Hubei, Hunan, Changsha, in Hunan, or Sichuan, or Gansu. They come from another province or another region, and they're working here, living here, saving here, and spending at home.
Yeah,
And that's
and
the way it works.
yeah. Speaking of that, F. Lou mentions in the comments. I heard they said most Americans don't have savings of more than $400. I don't know what the exact figure is, but basically that's true. That's the majority of Americans don't have enough savings to be able to afford a $500 emergency. So they, I mean, you know, most Americans aren't able to save for retirement. Basically,
But doesn't your Social Security cover your retirement?
No, it's nowhere near enough to cover retirement. I mean, unless you make a lot of money, and then you're fine, and you'll have a private retirement too. But yeah, Social Security is not a great living, and yeah, people are just in crazy amounts of debt here. I forget what the figure is now for student loan debt. I'm sure it's, I'm just guessing. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's probably at least $1 trillion worth of student loan debt. And people are just
do you know how much
drowning
it costs
in
to go
debt.
to university here?
Huh?
Do you know what it costs to go to university here? No, it's not. It's not free. For many people, it is free. If you're impoverished, if you're from an impoverished region that's getting poverty alleviation, yes, you can get free. But generally speaking, it's not free. What is free is 10 years, 9 years in rural areas, 10 years in the cities of education. That is free. Once you finish that, you go to university. My wife did it just a few years ago. She went to university for 4 years. She did a bachelor degree course, and it cost us 10,000 RMB per semester, 2 semesters a year. So 10,000 RMB, but that included her accommodation in the university campus. So effectively, you're talking about a little more than 1,000 RMB a month, and she had to pay for her own food. The books were provided free of charge. All the study materials were provided free of charge, but she had to pay for her own food in a subsidized canteen. So she could go off campus and pay in a restaurant, but the subsidized canteen, 6 or 7 RMB for a meal there. And then, I've worked in universities as well. I can tell you the food is damn good in most places I've worked. Chinese food.
Students here at universities spend, let's say they're taking 5 courses in a semester, they'll spend several $100s on just their books. Like textbooks are often over $100 for just one textbook for a course. And most of the time students sell them back for much less than they bought them for.
Yeah, that's you buy them from a student notice board usually. $40,000 a year. 10,000 RMB is
tuition, Seymour, or overall? Because there's a lot of universities now, the upper echelon of private universities that are like 70,000 a year just for tuition.
Overseas students. I used to send. There's an exam called the IELTS exam, the International English Language Testing System, and I was an IELTS examiner for a couple of years. And as a result of that, I did a lot of private training, private tuition, which I don't do anymore. But I used to send a lot of students, or help a lot of students to get overseas. I never sent them anywhere, but I would help them to get overseas. You need to have this IELTS score before you can get a visa to go overseas, or before you're accepted into a university. Most of the time, universities will give you what's called a conditional invitation. So you get a letter which says you're invited to join our university, but you need to have this, this, and this. And the IELTS score is one. So I would see literally thousands of students in my working career here. I've seen thousands of students, and the fees they were paying were things like 400,000 or 500,000 RMB a year, 500,000 RMB a year to go across to America, or Canada, or UK, or Australia to study. So yeah, it's a lot of money, and Chinese people can afford it, which is interesting. Or
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
I mean,
Seymour says
the
this is
cost
a
of
public
living here.
university.
You know, one thing about the U.S. versus China is that whereas things have been getting better and better in China in terms of what people can afford, like their income versus the cost of living, it's been going in the opposite direction in the United States for several decades now. I mean, for instance, in the 60s, you could attend, like a high-level public university, like University of California at Berkeley, for virtually free in terms of tuition back then, and now it's even if you're in state, it's several $1,000s a semester, and like people just can't afford all the different things you have to afford. So you have to choose. Okay, if I have a serious medical condition, I may have to choose, but between getting my medicine and getting enough food, or paying all the bills and so forth. It's just, I mean, something like 500,000 people a year go bankrupt in the United States from medical debt.
435,000 was the last figure I saw.
Yeah.
And I remember it because I was like, wow, stunning. Yeah. Medical debts. This is an interesting comment from Kevin. There has been an increase. Another statistic that I found recently, in a 10-year period from 2011 to 2021, during that decade, 2011 to 2020, China built more universities, more new universities than the UK has of universities. Wow. Now, I don't know the number now, but just in the city where I live in Zhongshan, and this is verifiable facts. I live in a city called Zhongshan. It's the home of Sun Yat-sen, the first president of China, the leader of the KMT back in the day, the guy who basically created the Republic of China. And this is his birthplace. But it doesn't get any special treatment. It's actually in the Greater Bay Area. It's the poorest of the cities that are part of this Greater Bay Area. It may not be the poorest, but it's certainly the cheapest and easiest to live along the Pearl River. It's very, very easygoing city, not a rich city. They have built 3 universities and 2 vocational training colleges in the 20 years I've lived here. 3 universities and 2 vocational training colleges are new in the 20 years I've lived here. Now, I don't know how that compares with anywhere else in the world, but I find that pretty impressive.
Yeah, very much so. In contrast to that, Gaza now has 0 universities, no thanks to Israel.
Well, there you go. Newly built universities, 1,300.
Wow.
Yeah.
And somebody was commenting about how expensive their health insurance is. Over $1,000 a month insurance premiums.
That's nearly $2,000 a month.
Well, actually, he further elaborates and says the premiums are $14,000, and then the deductible, meaning the part that of your expenses that you have to pay out of pocket in a given year, is $8,000.
Okay.
I can't afford health insurance right now. I have no health insurance. If I did purchase health insurance, like the minimum I'd be paying, it's probably $500 a month, and with that, I would have that policy would have like a $10,000 deductible, meaning that other than certain expenses that are covered no matter what, like routine office visits, let's say, if I have major medical expenses, then like the first $10,000 of it I would have to pay for myself out of my own pocket, even though I'm already paying a premium every month. So I can't afford insurance. My partner has insurance. She has Medicaid because she's not making a significant income, so she's eligible for Medicaid. So she has insurance. It's not great insurance, but she has it. I don't. and I won't till I'm 65. When I'm 65, I'll be able to get Medicare.
Okay. I don't have health insurance. I did when I worked. It was part of the job. Every person who has a job, every person who has employment gets health insurance. Now there are exceptions to that in China, and that's the gig workers, but there's getting less and less gig workers as more and more of them move into full-time work. So that's another improvement. You're going the opposite way, more and more gig
Right.
workers and less
More
full-time. So we're kind of reversing each other. But generally speaking, if you have a job, you have health insurance. And it's done differently here. It's not very well developed. What actually happens here is that people pay a premium every month from their salary. It's like a social security contribution. And that premium is saved for you. So I worked for one organization for 3 years here in Zhongshan, and then I moved to Guangzhou to work for another organization. I didn't move myself. My job was in Guangzhou, and that meant that I had to close because I'm a foreigner. If I was not a foreigner, I could transfer all of this, but as a foreigner, it's a little more awkward. So I closed my account and I reopened an account in Guangzhou. And this was all done by the Human Resources Department. I didn't physically do anything apart from go and sign a piece of paper. But when I closed my Zhongshan account, I got 32,000 RMB cash back because that's my contributions. Now, that would have covered pretty much everything except a life-threatening illness. It would have covered appendicitis. It would have covered all kinds of things like these. If I broke a leg, I'd be covered. I had enough money. If I was in a car crash, and as long as I wasn't seriously injured, all my basic necessities would have been covered with that. So what I did was I put that into a bank account and left it there. And then I did the same thing, working a couple of years in Guangzhou. And when I left there, it was basically my retirement. I added that to the bank account. So those two things are sitting in the bank account, and I've got a little bit more that I've put away. Now, health expenses here are much, much cheaper. And the best guide to this is talking to someone like Lee Barrett. Lee Barrett of Barrett channel on YouTube. He got cancer. And he's made no secret about this. He's gone live and talked about it. He's talked about it with me in live streams. But he also made a couple of videos about his treatment and what happened to him. He had a 5-hour operation. He had chemotherapy. He had radiation therapy. He's had all sorts of things. And the entire bill, everything, was under 20,000 British pounds. So about 30,000 US dollars. Now, what that means is, we can really get better. Or I basically said if I need to have that kind of treatment, I would be looking at that and saying, well, what's the prognosis? If the prognosis is less than 50-50, then I'll probably just say, okay, let's manage my way out of here rather than spend all that money just to keep me alive an extra few months or a few years. But that's a decision we haven't had to make yet. So for me, this has been a really interesting experience because I've put aside enough money to cover almost everything except major life-threatening diseases or major life-threatening injuries. Now, the other thing about if it's an injury, if I'm in a car accident, if it's not my fault, the driver of the car is going to pay my bill. So that's his problem or her problem, not my problem. Although, of course, there's all sorts of things there, and the police do get involved in those things rather than insurance companies. So there's a lot. Yeah, I'm just going to put this up. Lee Barrett is healthy now. I spoke to him less than a month ago, or about a month ago, and we're going to meet again in another month to talk about his driving experience. He's just bought an electric car, EV. So he is healthy now. He went through a very difficult time. He had cancer. He went through chemotherapy that didn't work. He was faced with options, and he took the 5-hour operation. Then after the operation, he went to radiotherapy and more chemotherapy. And it's 2 years ago now, and he's healthy. So it worked. So that's why.
If you have a life-threatening major illness like advanced cancer, you could easily be talking upwards of $1 million on your total health care costs.
The interesting thing about Lee's situation, had he been in the UK, he probably would have got it all for free, but he might have had to wait a year or 2 years for it. Who knows what his situation would be like in 1 or 2 years? Had he been in America, it would have been a financial disaster. But because he was in China, it's hard. I mean, how do you find 120,000 RMB? I think it was 180,000, something like that. It's a lot of money to find. But what most people do, and I've got perfect examples of this, most people in China have savings just for that situation if they don't have the coverage. So that helps. So if I'd only worked for those 3 years for that company and I got the same cancer, the 30,000 that I got back would have been enough to cover the first 30,000 of treatment, and then I'd have to find money for the rest of it. Having said that, you won't get turned away from a hospital if you can't afford it, but you will get a bill afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a good point. I mean, I'm not sure if it's a relevant point. Kirk Guilo 60, his wife got cancer, and he took her back to Canada for treatment, and 2 years later, she passed away. Which is pretty sad. I mean, Kirk's a nice guy, and he adored his wife. And he's back in China now and living here permanently as a mark of respect for his wife, and because this is his home. Once you've been here a few years, it's very hard to live anywhere else. But she passed away in Canada, and he's brought her ashes back to be buried here. That's quite recent. That's around a little before Christmas.
Yeah.
So, what else are we going to talk about?
Well, I was just scanning through your article now. Maybe we could just talk about some other topics that you talked about in there and do a little comparison with things here in America.
How about traveling?
Yeah, I mean, we have very little mass transit. So if you want to travel, any sort of distance, you're gonna have to either drive or fly on a plane, because most places you can't get to with trains, and they take forever. We have some parts of the country with high speed rail, but not very many. So
can you define high speed rail in the American sense?
Well, I mean, there's trains that go over 100 miles per hour. I don't think we have any that go over 200 at this point. There's talk of building something like that, but we have. And most cities don't have subway systems, and their bus service is not very good. I mean, we just have a bus service here in Bloomington. I mean, I guess because it's a small town, but Indianapolis, a nearby very large city, also has no subway system and terrible bus service, and cabs are pretty expensive. So you pretty much have to have a car to get around in many places in the United States. Definitely if you live in a rural area, but usually if you live in a suburb or even in a big city, it's hard to get around. Well, I mean, you probably saw the Tucker Carlson segment where the subways are all clean and nice and spiffy, and Moscow, and they're not terribly expensive, and it isn't like that here. They're a disaster, and a lot of homeless people live on the subways in big cities. They just sleep on the train cars because they don't have anywhere else.
You do get people on the subways here begging. It does happen. It's quite rare now, but it certainly was common. Zhongshan doesn't have a subway system yet, but it will this year. Later this year, we will have 4 stations. And the truth is, there's not a need for it here. I was going to ask you, I've got my phone out here. What's the flag fall for a taxi where you are? So you jump into a taxi and you're only going to go 2 or 3 miles down the road. What's it going to cost you?
I don't know. I don't take cabs a great deal because I drive everywhere. So I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Okay. It's. Somebody was asking in the comments the conversion rate between miles per hour and kilometers per hour. It's roughly
5/8.
1.6 kilometers per mile, or a mile, or 0.62 miles is 1 kilometer. So that's
every. And I used to have this calculation in my head when I was cycling, how many miles I've done. For every 5 miles, you have covered 8 kilometers. So every 5 miles is 8 kilometers. Now, I've got, and I don't know if you can see this. This is my most recent Didi car. Now, we have a thing called Didi. It's Uber in your country, but Didi is there. The most recent was from, it says, opposite the usual place to Bo-Ai Elementary School. I live near Bo-Ai Elementary School. So what we're talking about there was a about 3 kilometers. It cost 9 RMB, which is $1.20. The last one, I was 12 kilometers away, and it cost 36 RMB. So that's, what's that, about $6, maybe less than $6. The one before that was on the way to the same place, was 45. Now, I don't have a car, so I just use Didi. The 45 RMB to go to this place that's 12 kilometers away, and 36 RMB to come back. More traffic on the way there because we were going there at dinner time. So we had dinner at this restaurant, which is 12. A friend of mine owns the restaurant, so 12 kilometers away. It cost me 45, which is $7. Approximately $7, and 36 to come home, which is $6. Now in the UK,
and how far was that?
About 12 kilometers, probably about 8 miles.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's very cheap. The last time that comes to mind that I basically remember the price. I had to, back when I worked away from home, I had to take a cab to work because my car was in the shop, and I think I paid like $20, and it's about 2.5 miles away. So there you go.
There you go. A 5-minute drive, $35. I remember getting a taxi in London a few years ago. We were forced to get a taxi to the airport, something I would never normally do. But I tried to get a bus ticket to the airport bus from Victoria Coach Station, and it was sold out. There's no tickets for any airport bus until after our plane had left. So, we've got a few hours. We've got plenty of time to get there, but there's just no way I can get a ticket. And so there was 5 of us. 1, 2, 3. 5 of us, 5 adults, and all of our suitcases stuck. So we had to get 2 taxis, and they were £70 each. Mine was 67, and the other one was £70. So I had to pay for them. I was with my wife's parents and an auntie. So it was just like, oh my God, and £70. I could probably get a taxi to Beijing for that. I don't know. I've never really thought about doing that. But seriously, £70 in a taxi, that was like 700 RMB. I could certainly go to Guangzhou and back for that fee. That wouldn't be a problem. Guangzhou's over 100 kilometers away, 80 miles to the center of Guangzhou. So if I'd gone to the center of Guangzhou, picked something up and come back, it wouldn't have cost me the same as going from Victoria Coach Station to the Heathrow Airport. Wow. So I'm looking to see if anyone else has put someone. I love this. Ooh. I don't know, Seymour, if you have been online and looked at China's metro systems. They are superb. And some of the stations are literally works of art. Guangzhou has one station where they've kind of themed it with classical music. And they actually have orchestras, mini orchestras, like 12 or 15 people playing, not every day, of course, but it's a regular thing. When a holiday is coming, the orchestra comes out. But all the time, there's pipe music, and the thing is set up like they also have, can you believe this? In Guangzhou, they have a metro line that does 180 kilometers. A metro line that's 120 miles an hour. That's high speed.
Yeah.
And that's a metro. 180 kilometers. I've been on it. And it has a clock. You can see the clock going up. And I got a photograph of it, 181 kilometers an hour. So, yeah.
Well, there's some route, I forget what city it's in, there, but it's like, I guess a maglev train, so it's going like, over 300 kilometers an hour, and it's just within the cities, like from downtown to the airport or something like that. I forget what city that's in, but yeah, you have that.
In the USA.
No, in China.
Oh, China has several of those, but the maglev, the one you're talking about, there's probably Shanghai. Shanghai has that.
Yeah.
The city of Beijing has an airport express that is very similar to that, but it's not so fast. It's been there for quite a while, more than 10 years. So old technology, as China says, it's been there 10 years.
Yeah, we constantly have trains derailing here, and leaking toxic chemicals all over the place.
There's another startling statistic there. China's high-speed rail has had 3 crashes in 15 years. 2 of them were quite bad. One of them was caused by a blizzard. One was caused by a mudslide, and the other one was back in 2011 when it was a very new system in Zhejiang, I think it was, where the train basically went too fast over a bridge and fell off. It was going over a curve and it fell off, and a few people died. That was the first one. And what they did with that is they reduced the speed from 350 down to 300 kilometers an hour. And there's never been another accident in that nature since then. The other 2 are both natural disasters. One was a mudslide during heavy rain. One was caused by a very severe blizzard. And that was actually just recently. The blizzard one was back in December. So we're only talking a couple of months ago. And I think the driver and a couple of passengers died on that one. But you have something like 6 crashes a week. Train crashes.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
It's a daily occurrence.
Yeah, and then also there are cases of government officials deliberately, like destroying infrastructure, because it makes their buddies money. So you've probably heard about the situation in Flint, Michigan being one state north of here, where basically the governor was bribed to switch Flint's water source from Lake Huron, which is one of the Great Lakes, and the water there is fairly clean, to the Detroit River, which is just like a completely toxic mess. I forget exactly what they got out of it for doing that, but basically they were making money off of switching the source of the water, and because this water was so toxic, it corroded the pipes, which are still lead in many parts of the city. So they have just lead poisoning everywhere, and all poisoning with all kinds of other stuff. And the government has never put up sufficient funds to come anywhere near fixing the situation. They so people are still suffering horrible health problems there. And, the government officials who did this to Flint have never been held accountable. And in fact, the governor who succeeded Rick Snyder, the Republican governor, she's actually a Democrat and has this reputation for being some sort of liberal. And she basically killed the investigation of the previous governor. So, he should be in jail, but he's not. He got off scot-free.
Wow. That wouldn't happen in China.
No.
They just...
He'd probably be dead. They'd probably...
the thing is, unless people... Yeah, unless people die, they don't give the death sentence, usually. I mean, it's unusual that it'll be done for a financial crime. But if people die as a result of their negligence, then the death penalty is usually imposed. But the death penalty is almost always, for this kind of crime, it's almost always imposed with a suspended sentence. So that means you serve 2 years as a good prisoner, a model prisoner. At the end of 2 years, a decision is usually made to commute your death sentence. Now they executed a couple just a month or so ago who this was a handsome young couple, good-looking boy, good-looking girl, and he was married to someone else, but she wouldn't divorce him because they had 2 children. So in order to get the divorce, they threw the 2 children out of the window of their multi-story apartment and said they fell. They didn't fall. They were thrown. In order for this guy to get a divorce, to be with this pretty girl, he killed his 2 children, and they got executed, both of them. There was no suspension of that death penalty. So China still gives the death penalty. There's an automatic appeal process. At the end of the appeal process, it's done. But when you give a suspended death penalty, that's usually for corruption, which landed. Now, a great example of this is the lady who was the head of the Sanli Milk Company. And you will remember the story 10 years or so ago of the Sanli milk, the tainted milk, which caused the death of some children. And it caused illnesses in many more children, thousands. And many of them are permanently disabled as a result of it, or permanently ill, so chronic illnesses. Now, what happened with that lady? She knew what was she knew the cause, she knew the reasoning, and she decided that profitability was better than fixing this problem. The milk was tainted with some form of plastic, which made it look like it was high protein, but in fact it was very dangerous. It formed inside of the baby's bodies and created all kinds of problems. She got melanine. Thank you, Wang Ta. She didn't do it herself, but she knew it was being substituted, and it provided greater profit. So she profited from this, her company profited from this, and she was given the death penalty. 2 years later, it was commuted to life in prison, and she has now served 9 years of that. So life in prison is 9 years in China. In the West, it can be 12 years or 20 years, depending on where you are. But life in prison usually doesn't mean you die in prison. In her case, I believe this month, February this month, is her time to be released. Her earliest date. Now, that will be subject to her behavior. It'll be subject to a lot of other things, but she can be released now or any time now. And probably we'll see that in the media soon. She's released from prison, having done, it was in 2008, but the penalty, she was a long time coming to trial. And then there was the 2 year of the suspension and then the 9 years. So 11 years in prison. That's the penalty that she paid for the crime that she committed. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing for the community if she's released, but maybe they'll just do it quietly. I don't know, but it's about now that it's due. So that's what happens with criminals who are corrupt and somebody dies as a result of it. Did you see what happened in Nangsha in Guangzhou yesterday? This is actually just up the river from us. A boat hit a bridge, a ship hit a bridge. Part of the bridge collapsed, and at least 3 are dead. I think 3 more are missing. Last time I looked, it was last night when I looked at this. There's 3 dead and 3 still missing. And the captain of that ship, I'm sure, will get the same thing, a suspended death penalty, if he's proven to be negligent. Now, if something happened to his steering and he couldn't control it, that's not the same thing. But if that happened because someone didn't do their maintenance job, that's a crime. So there's all kind. They look into all sorts of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of crime, we've talked about this before, but we have much worse problems with crime here in the United States than you do there. So it is. I mean, it's not safe for a woman to go out by herself at night. A lot of times here in the United States, most sexual assaults happen, between people who know each other, but there's a few percent that are by strangers. So if you're a woman, you do have to be very careful. And my understanding is that's not really the case in China. You were mentioning in your article that it was very rare for you to hear about like a burglary, for example. And, it doesn't happen that often, but, several times in my life, I've had stuff stolen from me, and most people have. Of course, about the homicide rate here in the United States. It's ridiculously high. Tens of thousands of people a year are murdered, or manslaughter or whatever. Because we basically let anybody who wants, more or less, get hold of a gun. And
can I put that into a little perspective for you? I wrote an article about a year, maybe 2 years ago now, about the differences in our murder rates. And I came up with this stunning statistic. You're 75 times more likely to be killed on your way to a New Orleans jazz club than you are on your way to a Beijing opera. That's a context. New Orleans is one of the worst. It's not the worst, but I was trying to find some kind of context to put this into. New Orleans has a 75 in every 100,000 people get killed. And Beijing has 0.5 in every 100,000. And Beijing's a capital city, so less than 1 in 100,000 people every year get murdered in Beijing. I honestly cannot remember a murder in Zhongshan. I can't remember one. I'm sure there's been one, and I read the media. When something happens, we hear about it. It's not like they don't tell us. It's not that it's not being advertised or promoted or told about. It's all over the media when something happens, and I can't remember one. It's as simple as that. Burglary, I've never had one. I've never been burgled. Currently, I'm sitting in a room full of camera equipment, and I have no bars or grills on this window because I have no fear. I've good secure windows and locks on them, but they'd have to smash my window to get in. But I have no fear that that's likely to happen.
I mean, I don't worry about it that much, but I've lived in this house for about 20 years, and I've had, I think, 3 occasions where, like, once somebody took stuff out of my car, and once they stole stuff out of the shed, and I had a bike stolen that I had sitting outside. So, it happens. And another, one criminal issue that's gotten a lot of attention of late in the United States, because it's become a progressively worse and worse problem, is drug trafficking. With predominantly these days, the problem is opiates. So we've gone from something like, I don't know, 10,000 a year or something like that of people dying of overdoses or other drug-related issues in the United States, like a couple of decades ago, to now it's about 100,000 a year, largely because of opiate overdoses. And typically, my understanding is the way it comes about is that people think they're buying heroin, but it's actually laced with fentanyl, which is like I think it's like 100 times more potent than heroin. And I guess drug dealers have switched to using fentanyl a lot, or smuggling fentanyl a lot of times, because it is so much more potent, and therefore it's a lot harder to catch when you smuggle it, because it just takes up less space. And so there's basically 2 reactions that the main reaction politicians in the United States have is to blame other countries. China and Mexico are the countries that get the blame for our and Canada's drug problem, because a lot of the chemicals come from China, a significant percentage.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
Some of them, yes. But and then they are shipped into the United States from Mexico. But Mexico does not have a significant opiate problem, even though that's where it's being,
the problem is society. There's no question about that. It's not supply, it's demand. That's the problem. There's always going to be a supply when there's a demand.
People don't know what they're getting. So they think they're getting like cocaine and it has fentanyl in it or something. And the other thing that is kind of a diversionary tactic is that I lost my train of thought. Damn it! I hate when that happens.
Talk about fentanyl coming in from China, and I can assure you it's not happening.
Not the drug itself, but
not even the precursors. You know what China did? This is a little known fact. China worked with the DEA for several years.
Oh yeah,
there was a DEA office in Guangzhou. And what they did when America came to China and said, we have this problem and this situation is being caused because the precursors are coming from China, China pretty much immediately, certainly within a very short period of time, they controlled and restricted that drug. So all of the chemicals that make up fentanyl are in China controlled. Fentanyl itself is controlled. You cannot get it unless you are an authorized buyer. Now, are there illegal things going on? Perhaps. But what China has done is clamp down. Working with the DEA, it's clamped down on stopping them. There is no way now that there is an industrial rate of production of those chemicals inside of China, I assure you, because what they're doing, they've captured them, they've executed several, they have an American in prison here in Guangdong, and the Americans can't say a word about this. There's an American citizen inside of a prison in Guangdong. He says he's innocent. The DEA gave the information to the Chinese police. So if he's innocent, there's nothing his mum says he's innocent. There's nothing the American government can do because the Chinese government arrested this person and put him in prison. They actually gave him a suspended death sentence. So that was 3 or 4 years ago. This was during this period of time. I can assure you there is there is no industrial scale production of the precursors, and there's no evidence whatsoever, none whatsoever, that any of those chemicals are actually coming from, originating in, or have any connection to China. Now, there may be Chinese people in Mexico creating these things, but it's certainly not part of China's industrial chain.
Yeah. So anyway, I just remember the other thing that politicians do to try and not really address the problem, but find somebody to blame for it. No, I'm blanking. Oh, the Republicans accuse the Democrats of having this open borders policy and just letting anybody come in, which is completely not true. Millions of people are deported at the border every year. People get killed quite often trying to cross the border illegally. There are like vigilante groups in Texas who basically hunt illegal immigrants down. The wall that Trump wanted to build along the border, Biden has continued that. The problem is not that it's that easy to get into the United States. The problem is that people who are able to legally travel back and forth between the U.S. and Mexico can easily smuggle stuff because it's so easy to conceal. So, it's not, porous borders that's the problem, really. It's,
It's an interesting one. There's 2.2 million people came across your border last year illegally. 2.2 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fairly significant number. And
it hasn't changed. It's always that way. And the reason that many people are coming here is because imperialism has wrecked their countries. Like the free trade agreements, for example, have decimated farming in Mexico and Central America. So the farmers have to come here to get work because they don't have work there.
Yeah, there's no job for them. So Fox News have this big thing going. It's a campaign at the moment to discredit Biden, but also because they're really doubling down on the China thing. They're saying that it was I think it was a 9,000% increase. Yes, it went from 500 people to 25,000 people. Okay, we can call that whatever you like in terms of percentages. But if you want to talk in percentages, what's that in percentages to 1.4 billion Chinese? And what's that in a percentage to 2.2 million illegal migrants coming across? So the number of Chinese people has definitely increased. And if you just look at that on a graph, it's an exponential increase. The number of Ecuadorians, the number of Venezuelans, the number of whatever other country, Belizeans, if that's the right word, is probably going up too, or it may be stagnant, but it's quite high. China is right down there on the graph. It's virtually non-existent. It doesn't appear on the graph if you look at the proper graph of this. But of course, they'll show the 9,000% increase in Chinese crossing the border and say, look how real this problem is. Yeah, it's a real problem. But where are they coming from? My guess is that they're coming from Hong Kong, not mainland China. If they're coming
Mhm.
from mainland China, they're criminals, because anyone who wants to can leave mainland China with a passport and a visa. So they're criminals. They're coming from mainland China, they're criminals. If they're not, then they're coming from Hong Kong. And why are they coming from Hong Kong? I bet they're coming from Hong Kong because America promised them things back in 2019 and hasn't delivered. America has let them down during the color revolution of 2019. And
Mhm.
America pulled all of its NGOs out when the national security law came in, because they knew the national security law was going to catch them. So anyone who didn't have diplomatic protection, they've scattered. So people are saying, oh, Hong Kong is not the international city it once was. Great. It's a Chinese city. And many Chinese people now fearing repercussions because of their illegal actions. America promised them sanctuary. America promised them refuge. America let them down. And now they're making their way across the southern borders to claim it. That's my view.
Yep. Yeah, excellent points.
So,
Um,
yeah, FLU said the same thing. They are actual criminals before they left China. And I believe that's true. There is no way. I mean, China is, as I said this, I mean, this is not just me. Every international organization that comes to China and measures China says it's improving in every respect. The World Bank says this. The Ipsos Global Happiness Index says this. The Edelman Trust Barometer says this. Harvard University, San Diego University, they all come here and they all say this. Don't argue with me. Don't tell me I'm a liar. Go tell those esteemed institutions that they are all wrong. And then you've got an argument. And this is my argument on my YouTube comments and on Twitter. I'm not the guy saying this. I'm experiencing it, but I'm not the guy saying it. I'm
yeah,
quoting.
and I mean, there are polling agencies from throughout the
Yeah,
world that poll
yeah.
people in every country about what do they think of the government and their specific officials and so on and so forth. And so here in the United States, Biden's hovering around 35 or 40% approval. In Russia, Putin is at around 80% approval.
Yeah,
Navalny was maybe 2%
2%.
of people
Yeah,
supported him. And meanwhile, the Chinese government's like over 90% of
yeah.
approval of the
Well,
Chinese government. So
the Harvard Ash report, which was before COVID, grant you, was before COVID happened, and COVID did switch it a little bit because people didn't like, not everybody, but some people didn't like COVID, so it came down. But the Harvard Ash report showed 95.5%, and that was if you counted the very satisfied, quite satisfied, and satisfied all together as one bundle. It was 95%. The unsatisfied was much lower, and that was in central government. So I mean, let's put that into perspective as well. I'm not saying that 95% of people approve 100%. They do know that they've got some degree of satisfaction. But why would you leave a country if you can afford to? Why would you leave a country that is doing this to you? It's increasing your health, it's increasing your wealth, it's increasing your lifestyle, it's reducing all of those problems like crime and social issues. There's no drug problem, there's no crime problem. Everything in China is getting better. And then people
yeah.
want to leave, and they want to leave illegally.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to enter another country illegally, there's only one reason. FLU has it there. They're criminals. That's the only reason it
Yeah.
could be. And if they're not
Yeah.
criminals, it's because they are dissatisfied with something. And there's no reason why, if I'm dissatisfied with China, what can I do? And people say, well, you're a foreigner, you can easily leave. Well, so can
Yeah.
anybody, including people in Xinjiang. They can just leave.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And
I have another, believe it or not, I have another live stream scheduled this afternoon.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
live. We're going to record
You've
this
been on
one.
for a short while.
We've
This might
started,
be our record, an hour and 48 minutes.
yeah, we're coming towards 2 hours. But
Yeah.
myself, Fernando, and a guy called Ian Ingalls have started a new channel, which is called the 3Ms. And I'm going to be recording one with them at 1 o'clock. So I need to go and do some preparation for that, because
Right.
it's a scripted show, effectively. And that new channel is, the way we describe it, peeling back the layers of misinformation. Now, we call it the 3 M's: mistranslation, misunderstanding, misinformation. They all lead to misinformation. So what we're trying to do is to kind of show, here's a story, this is why it's wrong, and then strip it down. So one story each week for about 30 minutes. That's a new channel called the 3 M's. There's lots of 3 M's in YouTube. So if people want to find it, they might have to look for the 3 M's Jerry Gray or something like that, or the 3 M's China. And even then, maybe you won't find it too easily. But it's just called, I think it's called 3Ms.social. Let me put that up. 3Ms.social. And it's Fernando, it's myself, and a guy called Ian Ingalls who works in Hainan. He works for Hainan TV, actually. 3Ms.social. So that's our social media. And we're making one show a week at the moment. We may increase that, but there's a lot of work into each show. So we're trying to make that into a very, very slick, professional looking. Fernando's doing all of the production. I do much of the research, and Ian is the host of every show. So that's the way we're planning to do that. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Oh, okay.
Pretty
well,
good
as
system.
long as we're advertising stuff, I just want to remind everybody that my channel is YouTube, youtube.com @TheBitterPill, all one word. And please go to the live section tab on my channel and look up this video and give me a like and maybe click on it so
what's your channel name?
Having watched it for a little bit, so I can get the boost in the algorithm. If you're not already watching it on my channel, and
let's put your channel name up. It's The Bitter Pill, right?
Yes.
One word?
Yeah.
Just The Bitter Pill?
Yeah.
Nothing else. Okay. Oh, there you've put it up too.
Yeah. I'm at Lefty
Something's
Vegan
happening. I can't show this.
X. And I also wanted to mention a couple of people you should try to have on at some point. There's a fellow I just had on my show a couple of weeks ago that you may have heard about, Jose Vega, who has really gotten quite a reputation for himself, disrupting the public events of major politicians like AOC and his local congressman, Richie Torres, and various others. And he is now running for Congress against Richie Torres, who's like, the congressperson for Jose's district, the poorest congressional district in the United States. But he doesn't do anything for his district. He's all about Israel. Like, he's one of the highest paid Congress people by AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, that the Israeli government's lobby in the United States. And so anyway, Jose is running against good old corrupt warmonger Richie. And he's very interesting to talk to. And also, actually, he was just in China recently. He was there for a couple of weeks, and I talked with him quite a bit about what he saw there. Another person who now lives in China that you also might have heard about is Ben Norton, who
I interviewed Ben 2 weeks ago.
Oh, awesome! I'll have to look that up. Yeah, Ben's great.
Great chat with him. We had some technical difficulties with sound, and I ended up interrupting him a couple of times, which I was trying not to do because but I thought he'd finished, and so I started the next, and then he came back again. So it was a little difficult, but and I'm going to get Ben on again. Ben and I are becoming friends. There's a couple of people like Ben. He's in Beijing now, but Jose Vega I'll certainly look into. And
Jose Vega.
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 Someone else has said Carl Zah. Carl and I have done it. It's not spelled like that, but I know who
ZHA.
Yeah, Carl and I have done. Carl was one of the very first people back in my early days on YouTube to interview me. And he also had a stint working for TNT Radio in Australia. I'm not sure if he still is there, but he interviewed me on there too. So he's interviewed me, but I've never interviewed him. And I think it's time. Yeah, it's time that I did speak to Carl Zar again. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, everyone, I've had a great chat, but I really do have to get going. It's coming up to 11 o'clock, and I've got another thing that I have to start at 1 o'clock, and I've got an hour or so at least to research something. Today, the show is going to be about the social credit score. So we're going to peel the layers of misinformation back, and that will be released probably on Wednesday of next week. So there's something to watch out for. The social credit score being released on Wednesday of next week, but I'll post it in my Twitter and I'll link to here. So my YouTube channel, so people can get a link across, but I won't put the video here because I want to build up the 3Ms channel more than this one. This one's never going to be monetized. The 3Ms, one day we hope we can get some money out of it. That's the plan. All right. So Donat, Seymour, Kevin, Syncmaster, FU, all of you today. Tony is there as well, and Steve Cole is
Mark Bogdanovich lives right across the bay from you. My friend and business partner. He's watching.
He lives across the bay.
Yeah, he's in Hong Kong.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just that's not far away. That'll be interesting to talk to him as well. But okay. Yeah. We have to get going. Thank you very much, everyone. Jeff, thanks again for this. And about a month's time, we'll do it again on a different topic.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Jerry. Cool. And take care, everyone. Thanks for all the great comments. And thanks for watching. You guys have been great. We will see you